Washington, D.C., a high-profile community activist is butchered beyond recognition.
This killing appeared to be one of so much passion.
There was approximately 25 stab wounds to his skull.
The nation's capital is shocked.
He knew the mayor, he knew people on the city council.
He was so committed to the community.
The search for suspects leads to the city's underbelly.
He had been threatened by the neighborhood drug dealers.
Police uncover another side to the victim.
His personal life was very dark, very scary.
This was some kind of sexual encounter gone bad.
A 911 call brings police to a house in downtown Washington. Homicide detective Oliver Garvey is the lead investigator.
Murders happen for a lot of different reasons. And I immediately said to myself, this is going to be a very interesting case.
The home is that of a well-known community leader. 51-year-old Dennis Dolinger is an anti-crime activist who's lived in the neighborhood for more than 20 years.
When we walk into the house, we saw blood on the door, we could see blood on the steps, we could see blood in the living room.
Garvey follows the bloody trail downstairs.
When we went down to the basement, I saw Mr. Dolinger lying on his back, blood coming from his mouth.
Severe head wounds leave him almost unrecognizable. Gerald Wills leads the team of mobile crime technicians.
I didn't know if he had been shot, stabbed, or had obtained his injuries in some other manner. This killing appeared to be one of so much passion, or as one may say, overkill.
When we took a better look at Mr. Dolinger, you could see that he had multiple defensive wounds on his hands. And when you look at these wounds, you could immediately tell that they were done by a Phillips screwdriver. And it leaves a stellar type of wound.
Police can't find the murder weapon, but the damage it inflicted is horrendous.
You could see that there was a very violent struggle. Dennis fought for his life.
The wounds tell detectives Dolinger faced a single attacker.
He couldn't have had the defensive wounds. That if there were two attackers, they'd have held his hand back, it would have been wounds to the body. There were none of that. The medical examiner looked at Mr. Dolinger and determined that there was a 4-hour window that Mr. Dolinger had died in.
He's been dead approximately 4
That means he was killed some time after 12 noon. Next to the body, police find a pair of blood-soaked jeans. It's the first piece of physical evidence linked to the killer.
I'm sure that the struggle would have left quite a bit of blood on the assailant who attacked the victim. So I think it would have been a necessity for the assailant to find a different set of clothes.
Inside of the coin pocket of the jeans was a Ziploc with a white rock that was field tested positive for crack. As we picked Dennis up, we could see that there was a bloody $20 bill under his body.
The evidence points to a drug deal gone wrong.
We looked at it, then we looked at his clothing. His belt was loose, like it was off, but once again, that could have came off during the struggle.
As we continued to survey the scene, what was significant is that we located a blood trail which led to a basement bathroom. Inside that bathroom, we found blood in the sink, we found a towel,
We could tell that the assailant washed his hands and dried them on the towel.
The murderer tried to wash off the blood of his victim. In the process, he left massive amounts of his own DNA for police to find.
Once I saw the way Mr. Dollinger was laid, I knew that he wasn't moving. So the blood droplets we saw throughout the house was done by the attacker. So we knew that the attacker was injured during this assault.
Police recover several blood samples to test against future suspects. They know their murderer is cut, probably on his hands. Then they discover another vital clue.
There was no forced entry to the front door, and as we continue with our investigation and checking the remaining entrances to the location, there were no signs of forced entry into the premises.
It suggests Dollinger may have known his killer.
The blood trail led us up the stairs, up to the 3rd floor, where we found some additional items of evidence.
We could see that dressing room area, that dresser had been ransacked. There were some jewelry boxes turned over inside out. There was a gray sweatshirt, a pullover type, that had some brown stains on it. And as you got closer and you looked, you could tell it was blood. We looked at the shirt and we realized that this shirt was part of the crime, that someone wore this shirt and changed out of that shirt and into another shirt that probably came out of Mr. Dollinger's closet.
Seeking more details, police interview Dollinger's neighbors, starting with the woman who called 911. She reports seeing a stranger at the scene earlier that day.
We talked to the 911 caller, who immediately told us that an individual had walked into Dennis's home and came out of his home.
It's an important lead to a potential suspect.
She saw the individual drive away and wrote the tag number down and provided that to the police.
While his team works to find the owner of the vehicle, Garvey concentrates on how the victim spent his last day.
Dennis was known throughout the neighborhood for sitting on his porch, smoking a cigarette, and having a cup of coffee. He had his ashtray out there, his pack of cigarettes was out there, and half full of cup of coffee was on the porch. So we could tell sometime during that day and that morning, he was on his porch. The next time someone thought they saw something was approximately anywhere from 11 to 12. The next door neighbor told us that they saw someone that appeared to be Dennis talking to someone else. But they couldn't tell if it was black or white, just that they could see another figure in there.
It was the last time anyone saw Dollinger alive, calmly talking to the person about to murder him.
That day, he took everything out on Dennis. It's a very horrific crime.
In Washington, police are on the hunt for the brutal killer of community leader Dennis Dollinger. Desperate for leads, they turn to those who knew him.
When I first heard that he was murdered, the first thing that came to my mind was hate crime. I thought for sure that somebody murdered him just because he was homosexual.
The killing leaves other victims. Dollinger's close-knit and loving family are totally devastated.
My mother was in hysterics. All of the aunts and uncles that were basically his brothers and sisters that he grew up with were all just hysterical.
And it's not just his family that's stunned by his murder.
Dennis knew a lot of people, important people in the city. He worked with political activists. He worked with members of the Washington City Council. He was known in the mayor's office.
Dolinger's friends come forward with their own theory on the killing.
There had been threats because he talked to me quite often, and he would tell me that different people has threatened his life.
The initial information we had was that he was murdered by drug dealers.
Dennis was working very hard to make it harder for some folks to do business in this community.
Dolinger worked for years to improve his troubled neighborhood by shutting down crack houses.
Dennis was very instrumental in starting an Orange Hat Patrol in his community, where the citizens go out and they patrol.
He had proven to be a very effective crime fighter.
And when the local drug dealers see this activity, they shut down shop. They don't sell any drugs, nobody does anything. So he had received several threats from local drug dealers stating, you know, stay out of our business or we'll get you, by word of mouth.
It was very dangerous for Dennis, but he didn't care about the danger. I don't know why. He just didn't seem to have that fear factor. He wanted his community to be safe.
Get out of here. Go in.
They were taking their community back block by block. So Dennis was feared. He was feared.
Feared and also hated. Dolinger's crusade had already led to extreme violence.
He had 2 miniature Doberman pinschers, and he came home from work one day, and one of them was thrown over the banister with its leash tied on, and he believes that one of the drug dealers came over and murdered his dog.
The stories are all compelling, but fail to isolate any specific suspects. Police need more information. They hope the recently completed post-mortem will provide new clues.
There was approximately 25 stab wounds to his skull. 5 of those injuries penetrated his brain. He had 2 penetrating wounds over his left eye, to his left temple, 1 to the back of his right head, and 1 to the bottom base of his skull.
But as they recreate the grisly pattern of wounds and review the case so far, detectives begin to doubt their killer is a drug dealer.
Once we saw the injuries to Dennis, once we saw that he let the person in, we knew, okay, he wouldn't let a drug dealer in his house. We know drug dealers normally shoot or strangle or stab with a knife. A Phillips screwdriver is like a weapon of convenience.
They've lost a potential motive. It's a setback for the investigation. Then comes a breakthrough. The number plate search identifies the person seen fleeing the crime scene.
So, how'd you get in the house?
He went to Dennis's home because he hadn't seen him in a while. He said he knocked on Dennis's door, didn't get any answer. Saw that the door was ajar and went inside. Dennis?
The man claims to be a former lover of Dolinger's, who just dropped by to borrow some money.
He told us that he saw blood droplets.
Dennis?
And as he followed the blood droplets, it led him to the basement. And when he went to the basement, he saw Dennis lying in his condition. And we asked him, why didn't you call the police? He said he was scared. He had never seen a dead body before. So he panicked and left.
Doubting the story, Detective Garvey orders a blood test. He also takes a closer look at the man's hands.
We examined him for any injuries. This individual didn't have any injuries at all.
Knowing the killer had some kind of wound, Garvey dismisses his one and only suspect. Delving deeper into the case, police discover the life of Dennis Dollinger was not all it seemed.
To me, his personal life was very dark, very scary, very sad.
Sorry to hear what took place, as you know.
Although a community leader and local hero, behind closed doors, Dollinger had a taste for dangerous lovers.
The more you were on the totem pole, the better, the more attracted he was to you. This is one of Dennis's ex-lovers.
There was a lover that he had in his past that lived with him, that there was some domestic disputes and some domestic violence involved.
Apparently, this former boyfriend had a sadistic streak, frequently making Dennis the target of his wrath.
He had no self-confidence whatsoever. And this gentleman would often beat him, and he would just take it and not fight back, or it's so sad. I think it stems from the lack of love that his parents never showed him. And I think it got him in trouble a lot of times.
This twisted relationship may have cost Dollinger his life.
Detective Garvey.
Garvey tracks down the ex-lover, but the man says he wasn't in Washington the day of the murder.
Will you take my card?
A quick check of the suspect's hands and arms backs up that story. No sign of stab wounds anywhere.
We corroborated his alibi, which he was at home with other family members at that time.
It's another dead end for police.
We have to start the whole investigation over from ground zero. We have no suspect now.
Detectives refocus their efforts on the crime scene.
A family member had advised us that he always kept his wallet in the kitchen drawer. We looked in that kitchen drawer, his wallet was missing. The murder was on a Friday. We held that house Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I was going through the house every day.
Finally, 5 days after the murder, Detective Garvey notices something new. A voicemail message left in the last 24 hours.
This is Joanne from Chase Manhattan Bank's Credit Card Services Department. We want to alert you, Mr. Dollinger, that there was...
A local bank had left Dennis a message saying that there was some activity on his credit card that was suspicious, so they immediately put a stop on his credit card. I called the local bank. They told me that the credit card was used in Alexandria, Virginia, at a local department store and at a beauty salon.
It's just a short drive from Washington, D.C., across the state line to Virginia.
They gave me the addresses of both locations. I immediately jumped into my car and I headed to the beauty salon.
Garvey checks with the salon manager. He knows who used the credit card. It's a man named Steve Watson.
He says, well, Steve is a white male, uses drugs, he has AIDS, plays the guitar for money on the streets. Everybody knows him.
Yep, that's done. Thank you very much. Thanks, man.
Garvey moves quickly, tracking down Watson in his apartment.
Watson!
It's the lead detectives have been seeking. The killer cashing in on his crime with a stolen credit card. And there's more. Watson has a long history of property crimes. He steals to support his heroin habit.
We sit him down, we conducted a search.
Jeez, what you been up to?
What they find breaks the case wide open.
This?
We find Mr. Dollinger's personal information driver's license, cards, and it's in his garbage can. What you got here?
Jackpot. Who else but the killer could be in possession of the victim's wallet and ID and be using his credit card the day after the murder? Watson claims he found the wallet in a backpack at a subway station.
So he finds it, he finds all the stuff in it, and he just takes it and just goes home. That's his story.
But Watson's own flesh calls his story into question. His hands are cut, and his wounds appear about a week old, which fits perfectly with the crime.
We said, well, how'd you get that cut on your hand? He says, well, you know, I use heroin and I cook it up. And we said, well, what do you mean? How do you cook it up? He says, well, I get a Coke can and I break it open. And I put the heroin on top and I cook it, and, you know, and when I split the Coke can, I cut myself. So we listen. I'm saying, okay, but still, my assailant is cut. And however he wants to describe how he got cut means nothing to us, because our man is cut and he's bleeding.
Garvey consults with Assistant U.S. Attorney Mike Ambrosino on how best to move forward in charging their suspect.
Stephen Watson gave a statement admitting that he found the backpack, and he admitted to spending the credit cards, but he did proclaim his innocence with respect to the murder and claimed no knowledge of who had left that backpack.
6 days after the killing, police arrest Stephen Watson for credit card fraud. It's a move that buys them time to build a case for murder.
To us, Stephen Watson's looking real good. Looking real good.
The arrest of drug addict Stephen Watson brings some solace to the grieving family of murder victim Dennis Dollinger.
We have him extradited back to the District of Columbia the day that Dennis' funeral was being held. So the family immediately has some closure.
I thought case closed. I mean, he was found with his wallet, his credit cards, his medical card. You know, why would this guy have it if he wasn't in the presence of Dennis on that day?
Trying to firm up his case, Detective Garvey talks with drug dealers in the same part of town Steve Watson buys his heroin.
We later find out that through other people in this drug area that he was around there that day, approximately a quarter mile from Mr. Dollinger's house.
Garvey learns that just 2 hours after the murder, Watson was flush with cash and eager to score.
He had been seen with blood on his shirt and had also been seen with a cut on his hand.
All the pieces are fitting together, but one thing still bothers the detective. He can't prove Watson and Dollinger knew each other. And if they didn't, why would Dollinger let Watson into his home? To find a connection, Garvey combs through the address books of both victim and suspect.
We found an individual that they both knew in each address book. It's like, wow, this is odd. So we contacted this individual. We said, look, you know, we're investigating the murder of Dennis Dollinger. How do you know Dennis Dollinger?
Oh, well.
The man tells police he's known Dollinger for years.
He says, well, I knew Dennis from the 80s, where drug use, the partying, open sex, they kind of knew each other from then.
He also claims to have met Steve Watson around the same time.
He said Stephen Watson used to be a male prostitute who would provide services in the area of 9th and New York Avenue, 13th and New York Avenue, in that northwest area of D.C. That's where he remembered meeting Stephen Watson, picking him up, having sex, and developing a friendship where they led from sex and drugs, and so he knew both of them.
Police suspect Dollinger, the client, and Watson, the prostitute, hooked up at some point and developed a relationship. On the day of the murder, the two men could have met for sex at Dolinger's house.
What?
But for some reason, perhaps relating to money, things turned sour, igniting a rage in Watson that spiraled out of control. It would explain a puzzling piece of evidence. The $20 bill discovered under Dolinger's body.
We looked at it, and then we looked at his clothing. His belt was loose, like it was off, but immediately came to our mind was there money for sex?
Washington detectives have built what looks like a solid case.
We have motives, opportunity, and physical evidence, so we charge him with the murder.
The family was elated. We were very happy.
But that happiness is destined to be short-lived. Four months after the murder of Dennis Dolinger, Washington police have charged a suspect. Their hopes of a conviction now rests on DNA analysis from the FBI crime lab. Dr. Sam Bechtel compares blood from the crime scene with a sample from accused murderer Stephen Watson.
We chose certain stains from both that sweatshirt and the blue jeans, subjected them to DNA testing.
A match will conclusively prove that Watson killed Dolinger. But within the microscopic strands of DNA lurks a very big surprise.
The profiles were different. Therefore, this suspect could not have contributed that blood stain. So that's how we were able right off to exclude the initial suspect.
I was shocked. I truly thought it was Watson. I mean, it just didn't make any sense to me.
The case falls apart. Detective Garvey is stunned. He's pinned the murder on the wrong man. Police now take one of the last options available. They run the crime scene DNA through a national database. Again, they come up empty.
This crime scene sample did not match a sample from some other crime scene, nor did it match the profile of any of the convicted felons who were in the database at the time.
It's another major blow. The killer is still at large. But Garvey isn't ready to let Watson go, believing he could still be somehow involved. If he didn't commit the murder, maybe he helped a friend do it, another junkie or felon from Virginia.
Stephen Watson had some friends that would occasionally steal cars. And because they would steal cars, they would have screwdrivers. So that was an aspect that we looked into.
Police believe Dennis Dolinger could have opened his door for Watson, and unknowingly for someone else, someone not afraid to use violence. Once inside, Watson could have left his accomplice to deal with Dolinger while he ransacked the house.
He's dead. Maybe he's dead.
Detectives hit the streets and track down several potential suspects in Virginia, all associates of Watson.
We had developed 6 suspects. And by then, we had collected samples from at least 5 of those suspects for comparison.
But there's more bad news.
We would run the comparisons, and there was no hit, as we would call it.
Yet another dead end. Not a single suspect remains. But there is one last hope. In 1999, the state of Virginia had a database of felons that was kept separate from the national database. It gives Garvey one last place to look.
So we said, okay, let's ask the state of Virginia to test their DNA database with this unknown blood sample.
Yeah, pretty nasty.
Police run the crime scene DNA through the Virginia State Database. Amazingly, they get a match. It's known as a cold hit.
It was the first cold hit case that our office had, meaning that DNA was discovered on a crime scene. It was run through a database, and we actually found the suspect that way.
6 months after Dennis Dollinger was slain, police finally have a suspect whose DNA links him directly to the crime. His name is Raymond Jenkins. Tracking the new suspect down proves easy. He's in a Virginia prison serving time for burglary. But he wasn't in jail 6 months ago, when Dollinger was murdered. Jenkins refuses to talk to police. They ask their previous suspect, Steve Watson, about him. He claims he's never met Jenkins. If that's true, how did Jenkins get into the victim's home?
No.
Police talk to another felon, Anthony Scott. He stood trial with Jenkins in the same burglary case.
Cool cat, too. So he says, when was the last time you seen him? He says, well, I saw him June 5th.
Garvey takes note of the date, the 5th of June, one day after the murder.
He says, well, they let me out of D.C. jail. I get out and I walk from D.C. jail all the way to DuPont Circle because that's my hangout.
Scott says that on his way to DuPont Circle, he ran into Raymond Jenkins.
I says, what does he say to you? He says, well, I look at him and he's all scratched up. Scratches on his neck, on his face, his hands.
He also had a lot of cash and men's jewelry.
He had a number of different types of jewelry that he identified that were consistent with what had been taken from Dennis Dollinger's house.
He says, come on, let's go get high. So they go off and they go buy some crack. They spend the whole day smoking crack.
The case against Jenkins is growing, but police still want to know how he knew the victim, or if he knew him at all.
Jenkins' MO was that he'd often be seen hooking up with gay men, gay white men, and Jenkins would routinely be seen around the fireplace. That's known as one of the sort of the gay hangouts.
A bouncer from the fireplace bar provides a key piece of information. Not only does he recall seeing Jenkins, he remembers Dollinger and Jenkins actually meeting.
This bar had a bouncer who specifically remembers Dennis picking up Jenkins in his silver BMW and driving off. So that's how we knew Jenkins knew that Dennis Dollinger lived, because he had been over there at least once before.
Finally, an eyewitness account that links the murder victim to the prime suspect.
We believe that they went to Dennis's house to have sex. And that's how we found out that they knew one another.
After huge disappointments earlier in the case, police are back on track. They've got an eyewitness account. They've got strong DNA evidence. The only thing they don't have is a motive, until they meet Robert Bethea.
I told you, man.
Bethea was a drug user and a drug seller who hung out in DuPont Circle.
Bethea tells police that just before the murder, Jenkins had invited him to join in a robbery.
He had said to him that it was a white guy that he was going to stay with, and that he had some quote-unquote cake, that there was something there to steal.
You know, you guys can come in.
So he says, okay, well, how are we gonna get in? He says, look, I'll get in, and once I get in, you know, I'll open the door and you can come in. And he goes, well, what if he says something? What if he bucks? He says, if he bucks, I'll punish him.
Bethea says he declined the offer.
He didn't have any ethical problems with robbing people. He just wasn't in the mood for that.
But Jenkins certainly was. Convinced they have their killer, police release Steve Watson. 8 months after the vicious crime, police charge Raymond Jenkins with first-degree murder. But the case is far from over.
What's up, Jenkins? How you doing?
Jenkins tells his defense lawyer a very different story about what happened the day of the crime.
All right, look. All I remember is I was there. Me and Dollinger was just chilling. A guy came in,
He injected the idea that this was some kind of sexual encounter gone bad.
Jenkins claims a lover of Dollinger's showed up and flew into a jealous rage.
This third-person perpetrator killed Dennis Dollinger and somehow injured Raymond Jenkins in the process.
Incredibly, it will be ages before the case goes to court. Legal wrangling over the admissibility of evidence causes one delay after another.
You can only imagine the desperation the family felt. We truly didn't think that this would ever go to trial.
After 6 long years, the Dennis Dollinger murder trial finally begins. Prosecutors think they have an airtight case. Jurors get a chance to evaluate the DNA evidence that puts Jenkins at the scene of the crime. But his defense team argues that the cuts to Jenkins' hands could not possibly have been self-inflicted. They maintain his claim that he was injured by an unknown attacker, the same man who killed Dollinger.
Well, how can someone injure themselves?
His defense attorney asked me, he says, well, how could someone injure themselves? I said, very simple, you know? He says, well, come down and demonstrate it.
Let's got him in a headlock, right? It's like this, right?
I came down off the witness stand. I said, well, if I'm attacking you, I can hold you in a headlock. And while I'm stabbing you, I can hit you in your skull, the knife will slide off the cranium and hit me in the hand or hit me in my arm, or just me trying to fight you, I can stab myself.
The post-mortem supports Garvey's theory, revealing that many of the screwdriver blows came from behind and above and only grazed Dollinger's head. The killer could easily have stabbed himself.
Stab him. Yep. Okay.
It slides off his cranium, hits him in the arm.
And so I think it was very dramatic evidence.
I could see some of the jurors going, oh, I can see how. Okay, it makes sense now.
The trial continues for 2 weeks. Finally, the prosecution rests its case.
We were very optimistic that we were going to win. We knew we were right.
The jury takes 96 hours to reach a verdict. More than 6 years after the murder of Dennis Dollinger, the jury foreman announces the decision.
Your Honor, we are deadlocked.
When the verdict came down as hung jury, I was shocked. There was nobody else there that did it. It was Raymond Jenkins.
The judge has no choice. She declares a mistrial. Then the case takes another turn when 2 jury members asked to see the victim's cousin, Michelle.
The 2 women both looked at me and they said it wasn't legal what was going on in there. There were certain individuals or an individual who would not change his mind no matter what the evidence was.
Who cares?
One of them, throughout jury deliberations, kept referring to Dennis Dollinger in derogatory terms. And this immediately alerted the other jurors that there was a biased juror on the jury. He had indicated that he had once stabbed his father, who was gay. And these were types of things that should have been divulged at the inception of a trial when you pick a jury.
As Dennis's family, there was nothing but desperation and frustration. You know, we were mad at the DC system. We were mad at the court system. We just wanted justice, and we didn't think we would ever see the day.
It's now almost 7 years since respected community leader Dennis Dollinger was murdered. After the surprise hung jury outcome of the first trial, prosecutors have a second chance to try and convict Raymond Jenkins.
We felt the evidence was overwhelming forensically. There was never an issue of whether we'd continue to go forward in this case.
Not only do they have strong forensic evidence, they also have an ace up their sleeve. A jailhouse confession.
Why don't you tell me what he told you in jail?
The stunning new testimony comes from a former prison mate of Jenkins.
Look, I killed this gay guy.
He specifically told them that he robbed the gay guy, that he had stabbed him a number of times repeatedly using a screwdriver, that he told him that some white guy had found his backpack and had been blamed for the murder, and that if they ever came for him, he was going to blame it on the white guy.
The new testimony would explain how Steve Watson had Dennis Dollinger's credit cards. Cleverly, Jenkins left them in a backpack as bait for someone else to find. He got off the subway a few stops from Dollinger's house, put the bag down in plain view, and walked away.
Some people commit murders and in certain cases get rid of the evidence to deflect it from them, give it to an unknown person. And in a lot of cases, that throws us off.
It was a sheer coincidence that Watson stole a wallet belonging to a man he once knew. But when he took the bag, he set off a chain of events that led police astray and almost let a killer go free. The prosecution now has both a confession and a scenario that explains the entire crime.
I think what the evidence at trial showed was that this was something that was planned out ahead of time by Jenkins.
Investigators know Jenkins and Dollinger had met previously and formed some kind of relationship, possibly sexual.
He somehow talked his way into the house. He made it into the basement. And that was when Jenkins took the opportunity to rob and kill Dollinger.
At some point during this assault, it turned very personal for Jenkins. I think he was able to take out all his frustrations on anybody that he had ever had, anything that happened in his life. He took it all out on Dennis.
Jenkins would have been covered in blood. His hands were bleeding. He went to the bathroom, cleaned himself up because he knew he was going to have to leave that house. He didn't want to look suspicious. So he left that trail of blood all through his house. He takes his shirt off up in the bedroom and finds a change of clothes. He ransacked his drawers, took his jewelry, took his money from his kitchen. So in the end, this heinous crime, Dennis Dollinger, who's killed in his own home, who's stabbed 25 times in his head, it all comes down to the fact that Jenkins wanted money to buy drugs. And that's really what this case is about.
The second trial is almost over. It could be their last chance for a conviction. Once again, the prosecution feels it has presented a very strong case, but only the jury can decide the outcome.
That's one point in the trial where you really feel your heart pounding, because it all comes down to that one moment when the judge asks the question, and for the count of first-degree premeditated murder while armed, how do you so find? And everybody sort of holds their breath and waits.
We thought it was over.
Let's play. What the hell is this, huh?
This time, the jury convicts. Raymond Jenkins is found guilty.
I think the whole family feels that justice was served. He received 56 years to life. However, I think deep down in, we all wish that DC had the death penalty.
We were just really fortunate that the case came together, because it ended up being an overpowering case.
We really fought hard. It felt, it was a long time coming. It just felt so good. Long time coming.
I think Dennis Dollinger's legacy is all positive. He did so much for his community.
Dennis was someone who was a community activist. He fought crime in his neighborhood.
The man who had selflessly fought to make the streets safer tragically failed to save himself from violence. But Dennis Dollinger is not forgotten.
The park across the street from his house that he had worked so hard to beautify and clean up was ended up being dedicated to him and his dedication to the community. And it was really nice.
Which nobody can deny.